3. A crowd of people, mostly women, had assembled outside the church, which was brightly lit up for the wedding. Those who had arrived too late to get into the middle of the throng pressed round the windows, pushing and disputing and trying to peer in between the bars. More than 20 carriages had already been ranged along the street by the mounted police. A police officer, unmindful of the frost, stood at the entrance looking brilliant in his blue uniform. More carriages kept driving up, and now ladies with flowers in their hair got out, holding up their trains. Or men appeared who doffed their military caps or black hats as they entered the church. Inside the building, the candles in both chandeliers were already lit, as well as all the candles in front of the icons. The golden glitter on the crimson background of the iconostases, the gilt ornaments of the icons, the silver of the chandeliers and candlesticks, the flagstones of the floor, the mats, the banners above the choir, the steps of the ambo, the ancient books black with age, the cassocks and surplices, were all inundated with light. On the right of the well-heated church, a staid, though animated conversation was going on amidst the swallow-tail coats, white ties, uniforms, brocades, velvets and satins, hair, flowers, bare shoulders and arms, and long gloves, the sound of which re-echoed strangely from the high dome above. Every time the door creaked, everyone turned round, expecting to see the bride and bridegroom enter. But the door had opened more than 10 times, and each time it turned out to be a guest who had been detained and now joined the crowd on the right, or a spectator who had managed to deceive or soften the heart of the police officer, and who joined a throng of strangers on the left. And both relatives and spectators had passed through every phase of anticipation. At first, they expected the bride and bridegroom to enter at any moment, and attached no importance to the delay. Then they turned more and more often toward the door, wondering whether anything had happened. At length, the delay became awkward, and the friends and relatives tried to look as if they were not thinking about the bride and bridegroom, but were absorbed in their conversations. The archdeacon, as if to draw attention to the value of his time, coughed impatiently, making the windows vibrate. From the choir, growing weary of waiting, came the sound of voices being tried and the blowing of noses. The priest continually sent a chanter or deacon to see whether the bridegroom had arrived, and he himself, in his purple surplice with the embroidered girdle, went with increasing frequency to the side door in expectation of the bridegroom. At last one of the ladies looked at a watch and said, "Well, this is strange," and then all the guests became restless and expressed their surprise and dissatisfaction aloud. The best man went to find out what had occurred. All this while, Kitty, long since ready in a white dress, long veil, and crown of orange blossoms, stood with an old lady who was to accompany her and her sister, the Princess Lvova, at the window of the ballroom at the Shcherbakskys, for the last half-hour vainly expecting her best man to come and announce that the bridegroom had reached the church. Levin, meanwhile, in trousers but without coat or waistcoat, was pacing up and down his room, perpetually putting his head out at the door and glancing up the corridor. But in the corridor there was nobody, and in despair he returned and addressed Oblonsky, who was quietly smoking. "Was ever a man in such a terribly idiotic position?" he demanded. "Yes, it is stupid," Oblonsky concurred with his soothing smile. "But don't worry, it will be here in a minute." "Oh, how can I help it?" said Levin with suppressed fury. "And these idiotic open waistcoats, it's impossible." He glanced at his crumpled shirt front. "And suppose the things have already gone to the station," he exclaimed in despair. "Then you'll have to wear mine." "I ought to have done that long ago." "It is better not to look ridiculous. Wait, it will all shape itself." The fact of the matter was that when Levin told his old servant Kuzma to get his things ready, Kuzma had duly brought his dress coat, waistcoat, and what else he considered necessary. "But the shirt!" Levin exclaimed. "You've got in on," Kuzma replied with a quiet smile. He had not thought of leaving out a clean shirt, and having been told to pack everything and send it to the Shcherbakskys, whence they were to start that evening, he had done so and had left out only the dress suit. The shirt Levin had been wearing since the morning was crumpled and quite unfit to wear with the fashionable low-cut waistcoat. It was too far to send to the Shcherbatskys, so they sent out to buy one. But as it was Sunday, all the shops had closed early. They sent for one of Oblonsky's, but it was much too wide and too short. They were obliged to send to the Shcherbatskys after all, and the things had to be unpacked. Meantime, in the church, everyone was waiting for the bridegroom. While he was pacing up and down like a caged beast, looking despairingly along the corridor, remembering all he had said to Kitty, and wondering what she must be thinking now. At last, the guilty Kuzma, quite out of breath, rushed in with the shirt. "Only just in time. They were hoisting the trunk into the cart," he gasped. 3 minutes later, Levin, not looking at the clock to avoid upsetting himself still more, ran as fast as he could down the corridor. "That won't help matters," remarked Oblonsky, smiling and following without haste. "It will all shape itself, I assure you." 4. "Here they are. There he is." "Which one? Is it the younger one?" "And look at her, poor dear, more dead than alive," people in the crowd were saying as Levin met his bride at the door and entered the church with her. Oblonsky told his wife the reason of the delay, and the guests smiled and whispered to one another. Levin saw no one and nothing. He did not take his eyes off his bride. Everyone said she had grown plainer during the last few days, and in her bridal dress was nothing like so pretty as usual. But Levin thought otherwise. He looked at her hair dressed high beneath a long veil in white flowers, at the high frill that covered her long neck at the sides, and showed it in front in a particularly maidenly way, and at her strikingly slender waist. He thought she was prettier than ever. Not that those flowers, the veil, or the dress ordered from Paris enhanced her beauty in any way, but because, despite all the carefully planned richness of her attire, the look on her sweet face and lips was still that look of innocent truthfulness. "I thought you meant to run away," she said, smiling at him. "It was such a stupid thing that happened. I'm ashamed to tell it," he said with a blush, and was obliged to turn round to the approaching Sergei Ivanovich. "Nice story, that, about your shirt," said Sergei Ivanovich with a smile and shake of the head. Yes, answered Levin, unable to understand what was being said. "Now then, Kostya," said Oblonsky, feigning consternation, "you've got to decide an important point, and you're in exactly the right frame of mind to appreciate its importance. I've been asked whether you will have new candles or used ones to hold. The difference is 10 rubles, he added, puckering his lips into a smile. "I have settled it, but perhaps you will not be satisfied." Though he knew it was a joke, Levin could not smile. "Well then, is it to be fresh candles or used ones? That is the question." Yes, fresh ones." "Well, I'm very glad that question is settled," said Oblonsky with a smile. "How stupid people do become under these circumstances," he went on, turning to Chirikov, when Levin, with an absent-minded glance at him, moved off toward his bride. "Kitty, mind you step first upon the mat," said Countess Nordston, coming up to them. "You're a fine fella," she added, addressing Levin. "Aren't you frightened?" asked Kitty's old aunt, Marya Dmitrievna. "Are you cold? You look pale. Wait a moment, put your head down," said Kitty's sister, Princess Lvova, and raising her plump, beautiful arms, she adjusted the flowers on Kitty's head. Dolly advanced and was about to say something, but could not speak and began crying and laughing in an unnatural manner. Kitty gazed at everybody with a look as absent-minded as Levin's. Meanwhile, the clergy put on their vestments, and the priests and deacon came forward to the lectern that stood near the entrance doors. The priest turned to Levin and said something that Levin did not hear. "Take the bride's hand and lead her," said the best man. For a long time Levin could not be made to understand what he had to do, and they were a long while trying to set him right. Just as they were going to give it up, because he would either use the wrong hand or else take her by the wrong one, he at last comprehended that he with his right hand, without changing his position, must take her by her right hand. When at last he had taken her hand properly, the priest went a few steps in front of him and halted at the lectern. The crowd of friends and relatives, their voices buzzing and the ladies' strains rustling, moved after them. Someone stooped down to arrange the bride's veil. The church became so quiet that the drops of wax were heard falling from the candles. The old priest, with his sacerdotal headgear and his locks of grey hair, glistening like silver, combed back behind his ears, drew his small old hands out from beneath his vestments of heavy silver cloth with a large gold cross on the back, and began turning over some pages on the lectern. Oblonsky stepped up cautiously, whispered something to him, made a sign to Levin, and stepped back again. The priest lit 2 wax candles decorated with flowers, and holding them askew in his left hand, so that the wax kept slowly dripping, turned to the young couple. It was the same priest who had heard Levin's confession. He looked warily and sadly at the bride and bridegroom, sighed, and disengaging his right hand from the vestments, held it up in blessing over the bridegroom, and then over the bride. Only in his manner, when he placed his fingers on Kitty's bowed head, there was a shade of tenderness. Then he gave them the candles, took the censer, and slowly stepped away from them. Is it really true? Thought Levin, and glanced round at his bride. He could see her profile slightly from above, and by the just perceptible movement of her lips and eyelashes, he knew she was aware of his look. She did not turn, but her high-frilled collar moved, rising to her pink little ear. He saw that a sigh had been suppressed within her breast, and that the little hand in its long glove, holding the candle, trembled. All the worry about his shirt, his lateness, the conversation of their relatives, their displeasure at his ridiculous mishap, suddenly vanished from his mind, and he felt happy, though scared. The handsome, tall senior deacon in a silver cloth alb, his curled hair parted down the middle, came briskly forward, lifting his stole with a practised movement of 2 fingers, and stopped opposite the priest. Bless us, Lord. Slowly succeeding one another, and vibratingly resonant, came the solemn tones. Blessed be our God, now and hereafter, forever and ever, replied the old priest meekly, in a sing-song voice, continuing to turn something over on the lectern. Then, harmoniously filling the whole church from windows to vaulted roof, a full chord sung by the invisible choir rose, swelled, hung for a moment, and softly died away. There were prayers as usual for the world above, for salvation, for the synod, for the emperor, and also for the servants of God. That day wedded Constantine and Catherine. Let us pray to the Lord that he may send them perfect love, peace, and help. The whole church seemed to breathe with the senior deacon's voice. Levin listened to the words and was struck by them. How did they find out that it is help, exactly help, that I need? He wondered, remembering his late fears and doubts. What do I know? What can I do in this awful matter without help? Help is exactly what I need now. When the deacon had finished the prayer for the imperial family, the priest, holding a book, turned to the bride and bridegroom. Eternal God, who joinest them that were separate, he read in his mild sing-song voice, and hast ordained for them an indissoluble union in love. Thou who didst bless Isaac and Rebekah, and hast kept thy promise to their heirs, bless these thy servants, Constantine and Catherine, and lead them on the path of righteousness. Most merciful God, lover of man, we praise thee. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, now and hereafter, and forever and ever. Amen, from the invisible choir, again floated through the air. Join us them that were separate. What a depth of meaning is in those words, and how well they fit in with what I am feeling at this moment, thought Levin. Does she feel the same? Looking round, he met her eyes. From the expression in them, he concluded that she understood them as he did. But this was not so. She understood hardly anything of the service, and was not even listening to the words of the ceremony. She could neither listen nor understand, so deep was the one feeling that filled her soul, and became ever stronger and stronger. It was a feeling of joy at the fruition of what had been for the last month and a half going on in her soul. of that which for those 6 weeks had gladdened and tortured her. On the day when, in the ballroom of the house in the Arbat Street, she in her brown dress had gone up to him and silently plighted herself to him. On that day and in that hour, a complete rupture seemed to have taken place within her soul, between her former life and this other new and entirely unknown life. Although, in fact, the old life still went on. Those 6 weeks had been the most blissful and at the same time the most trying of her life. The whole of her life, all her desires and hopes, were concentrated on this one man, still incomprehensible to her, to whom she was bound by a feeling, even more incomprehensible than the man himself, which now attracted and now repelled her. Meantime, she went on living under the conditions of her old life, and was horrified at herself, at her utter and unconquerable indifference to all her past, the things, habits, and people who had loved and still loved her, to her mother who was hurt by her indifference, to her dear, affectionate father, whom she had previously loved more than anyone else on earth. At one moment she was horrified at this indifference, and the next moment rejoiced at that which caused her indifference. She could not think of or desire anything but life with this man. But, as that life had not yet begun, she could not even clearly picture it to herself. There was only anticipation, fear and joy at something new and unknown. And now at any moment, the anticipation and uncertainty, and the remorse at repudiating her former life would all come to an end, and something new would begin. This new life could not help being terrible in consequence of its incertitude, but terrible or not, it was already an accomplished fact within her soul 6 weeks ago, and was now only being sanctified. Again turning to the reading desk, the priest, with some difficulty, picked up Kitty's little ring, and asking Levin for his hand, put the ring on the tip of his finger. The servant of God, Constantine, is betrothed to the servant of God, Catherine. And having put a big ring on Kitty's slender rosy finger, pathetic in its weakness, the priest repeated the same words. Several times the couple tried to guess what was expected of them, and blundered each time, the priest prompting them in whispers. When what was necessary had at length been complied with, he made the sign of the cross over them with the rings, and again gave the larger one to Kitty, and the little one to Levin. And again they blundered, and passed the rings twice backwards and forwards, without doing what was necessary. Dolly, Chirikov, and Oblonsky came forward to help them. The result was some confusion, whispering and smiles, but the expression of solemn emotion on the young couple's faces did not change. On the contrary, while they fumbled with their hands, they looked even more solemn and serious than before, and the smile with which Oblonsky whispered to them to put on their rings involuntarily died on his lips. He felt that any kind of smile would hurt their feelings. "Thou hast from the beginning created them male and female," read the priest when they had exchanged rings. "Through thee, the wife is knit to the husband for a helpmeet, and to procreate the human race. Therefore, O God our Lord, who sentest down thy truth upon thy heritage, and gavest thy promises to our fathers from generation to generation of thy chosen people, look down upon thy servant Constantine and thy servant Catherine, and strengthen them in their union with faith and concord in truth and love." Levin felt more and more that his ideas of marriage and his dreams of how he would arrange his life had been but childishness, and that this was something he had never understood and was now still further from understanding, although it was happening to him. And in his breast a tremor rose higher and higher, and the unruly tears came to his eyes. "5. All Moscow, including both the relatives and friends, had congregated in the church. During the marriage ceremony, in the brilliantly illuminated building, among the crowd of elegantly dressed women and girls, and men in evening dress with white ties, or in uniform, conversation in the low tones required by propriety never flagged. It was usually started by the men, for the women were absorbed in watching every detail of the service, which always fascinates them. In the circle nearest the bride were her two sisters, Dolly the elder and the calm, and beautiful Princess Lvova, who had come from abroad. "Why is Mary in lilac? It's almost as unsuitable at a wedding as black," remarked Mrs. Korsunskaya. With her complexion, it's her only salvation, replied Princess Drubetskaya. I wonder they are having the wedding in the evening, like tradespeople. It is more showy. I was married in the evening too, answered Mrs. Kushkunskaya, and sighed as she remembered how sweet she had looked that day, how funnily enamoured her husband then was, and how different things were now. They say that one who has been best man more than 10 times never marries, and I wanted to be one for the 10th time to make myself safe, but was too late, Count Sinyavin was saying to the pretty young Princess Tcherskaya, who had designs on him. She answered only with a smile. She was looking at Kitty and thinking of the time when she would be standing there, beside Count Sinyavin, just as Kitty now stood, and how she would then remind him of his joke. Young Shcherbatsky told the old maid of honor Nikolayeva that he intended to put a crown on Kitty's chignon to make her happy. One ought not to wear a chignon, replied the maid of honor, who had long ago made up her mind that if the old widower for whom she was angling ever married her, the wedding should be of the simplest. Kosnichev was talking to Dolly, jokingly assuring her that the custom of going away after the wedding was spreading, because newly married couples always felt rather uncomfortable. Your brother has a right to feel proud. She is wonderfully sweet. You must be feeling envious. I am past all that, Darya Alexandrovna, he answered, and his face became unexpectedly sad and serious. Oblonsky was telling his sister-in-law the pun he had made about dissolving marriages. I must put her wreath straight, she replied, without listening. What a pity she has grown so much plainer, remarked Countess Nordsten to the Princess Lvova. All the same, he's not worth her little finger. Don't you agree? No, I like him very much, and not just because he will be my brother-in-law, answered the princess. How well he behaves. And it is so difficult to behave well under these circumstances, and not to be ridiculous. And he's not ridiculous or stiff, and is evidently touched. I suppose you quite expected this? Almost. She always liked him. Well, let us see which of them will step first on the mat. I've given Kitty my advice. It does not matter, replied Princess Lvova. We are all submissive wives. It is in our nature. Well, I stepped on the mat before Vasily. And you, Dolly? Dolly, who was standing near, heard but did not reply. Her eyes were moist, and she could not have spoken without bursting into tears. She rejoiced at the sight of Kitty and Levin, but going back to the past, she thought of her own wedding, kept glancing at the beaming Oblonsky, and, forgetting the present, recollected nothing but her own young and innocent love. She remembered not herself only, but all the women with whom she was intimate or acquainted, thought of them as they had been at that most solemn moment of their lives, when, like Kitty, they had stood beneath the nuptial crown with love, hope, and fear in their hearts, renouncing the past and entering upon the mystic future. Among the brides that came to her mind was her dear Anna, about whose impending divorce she had heard a while ago. She too had once stood with veiled head, pure and crowned with orange blossom. And now, how strange, she murmured. All the details of the ceremony were followed, not only by the two sisters, the friends and relatives, but also by women onlookers who were quite strangers, and who, breathless with excitement and afraid of missing anything, even a single movement or expression of the bride's or bridegroom's face, and annoyed by the indifference of the men, did not answer, and indeed often did not hear the latter when they jested or made irrelevant remarks. Why is her face so tear-stained? Is she being married against her will? Against her will, indeed, to such a fine fellow. Is he a prince? And is that her sister in white satin? Now hear how the deacon will roar. Wives, obey your husbands. Is it the Chudovsky choir? No, the synods. I asked the footman. It seems he will take her to his estate straight off. He's dreadfully rich, they say. That's why they have given her to him. Oh, no, they are a very nice couple. There now, Mary Vasilievna, you are maintaining that crinolines were being worn fuller at the back. Just look at that one in the puce dress. An ambassador's wife, they say. See how it's draped, this way and back again. What a darling the bride is, like a lamb decked for the slaughter. But whatever you may say, one does feel sorry for a girl. so chattered the crowd of women who had managed to get inside the church. Six. When the first part of the ceremony was over, a verger spread out a piece of pink silk cloth in front of the lectern. The choir began singing a psalm, to some elaborate and complicated melody in which the bass and tenor continually repeated each other, and the priest, turning round, motioned the couple to the piece of pink silk. Often as they had heard the saying that the one who stepped first on the mat would be head of the household, neither Levin nor Kitty could think of that as they took those few steps, nor did they hear the loud remarks and disputes of those who maintained that he was first, and of others who said that they did it both together. After the usual questions of whether they wished to be married, and whether they had promised themselves to others, and their answers, which sounded strange to themselves, the second part of the service began. Kitty listened to the words of the prayer, trying to comprehend their meaning, but unable to do so. Triumph and radiant joy filled her heart more and more as the ceremony proceeded, and made it impossible for her to be attentive. They prayed, that they may live in chastity for the good of the fruits of the womb, and find joy in their sons and daughters. It was declared that God had created woman from Adam's rib, and that, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and cleave unto his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh, and that this is a great mystery. They prayed that God should make them fruitful, and bless them as he blessed Isaac and Rebekah, Joseph, Moses and Zipporah, and that they should see their children's children. It is all very beautiful, thought Kitty, as she heard these words, and could not be different. And a smile of joy, which involuntarily communicated itself to all who regarded her, shone on her radiant face. "Put it quite on," came the words of advice when the priest had put crowns on their heads, and Shcherbatsky, his hand in his three-buttoned glove trembling, held the crown high above Kitty's head. "Put it on," she whispered, smiling. Levin glanced round at her, was struck by the joyous radiance of her face, and was involuntarily infected by her feeling. He felt bright and joyous as she did. With light hearts they heard the epistle read, and the roll of the senior deacon's voice in the last verse, for which the outsiders present had been waiting impatiently. With light hearts they drank the warm wine, and water from the shallow cup, and their spirits rose still higher when the priest, throwing back his vestments, took their hands in his, and led them round the lectern, while a bass voice sang, "Rejoice, O Isaiah." Young Shcherbatsky and Chirikov, who were supporting the crowns and getting entangled in the bride's train, smiled too, and were pleased without knowing why, when they chanced to lag behind or jostle the young couple if the priest happened to stop. The spark of joy that was glowing in Kitty's heart seemed to have spread to everyone in the church. Levin fancied that the priest and deacon wanted to smile just as he did. Having lifted the crowns from their head, the priest read the last prayer and congratulated the married couple. Levin glanced at Kitty and thought he had never seen her like that before, so enchanting with the new light of happiness irradiating her face. He wished to speak to her, but did not know whether it was all over yet. The priest helped him out of the difficulty, saying softly, with a smile on his kindly mouth, "Kiss your wife, and you, kiss your husband." He took the candles from their hands. Levin kissed her carefully on her smiling lips, offered his arm, and with a feeling of strange closeness, led her out of the church. He could not believe it was all true, and only realized it when their surprised and timid glances met, and he felt that they were already one. After supper that same night, the young couple left for the country.